Welcome to Glass Houses, a Billy Joel podcast. I'm Michael Grosvenor.
And I'm Jack Fernino. Join us as we dig deep into Billy Joel's songs and history and what his music has meant to us.
Tonight, the Piano Man met the Rocket Man on stage. Thus, the stage was set for what some call the tour of the century. Billy Joel and Elton John. The house was packed, and inside, the dueling pianos continued to mesmerize the crowd.
"27 years ago this month, two titans of pop music teamed up for a run of sold-out shows that would set the tone for tours to come.
We're talking about the first face-to-face tour featuring Billy Joel and Elton John. In the summer of 1994, the two hit-making piano players shared the stage for a then unprecedented run of 21 sold-out shows in the United States.
In hindsight, the tour could have been a disaster. With a huge crew, two full bands, an exceptionally long show, and even a bout of food poisoning. But audiences loved it, and the pair would go on to team up for a total of 7 tours over the next 15 years.
It's been more than a decade since the last face-to-face concert, but this summer we're diving deep into the very first shows featuring Elton John and Billy Joel. I think this episode is going to come out right around the time that this tour actually started. Is my calendar correct on this?
I think we are looking at... let me look at the production calendar.
I was like catching you off guard with whatever horse shit comes out of my mouth, like when we start
Yeah,
an
you
episode.
do it. And it's good, though. I like it. Episode comes out. Yeah, you are right on.
This is going to be an interesting episode. We've touched on this actually twice, technically, before, because we've gone over 1994, and we did 2006?
2003.
And we did 2003. And so both of those years featured a face-to-face tour with Billy and Elton. We mentioned those in the course of those episodes, and this time we're diving into this initial tour in particular. So we are concentrating on really just 2 months worth of shows.
It's a total of about 22 shows that ran July and August.
And even though it was just a few shows, this kicked off a partnership that would go on for quite a few years, off and on. Gave us a little tabloid fodder and some drama, and also some really great performances. This is also a tour where both Michael and I saw shows, obviously different ones.
You started taking for granted the number of times they ended up doing a tour together in the 2000s. But this first run here in 1994, it was a big deal.
As we were putting this one together, I was really racking my brain. I couldn't think of another double headlining tour like this, really before or after.
None to this magnitude. Co-headlining tours have existed, certainly, but two artists at this level that can play large venues on their own, deciding to share a bill like this, yeah, I can't think of a time where this has happened.
You know, something that may be easy to take for granted now because we're so used to package tours and festivals. I remember even a few years ago, we went to see, it was a metal show, and a friend of mine was like, is like every concert a festival now? Like, is this how it goes? Because I think that was like Black Label Society and Down, and then 2 other bands, and then like 1 other band that nobody knew. So it was like 5 bands in the night. 2 of them were, you know, in the metal world, big headliners. And,
right.
You know, the more you look around, the more they're putting shows together like this now. But this was probably one of the first ones.
It's one of those situations where the stars had to align just right because, you know, at this time, both Billy and Elton were still putting out records. Now, granted, Billy didn't put out a pop record after this point, but we didn't know that at the time. You didn't want to cannibalize your world tour supporting your record. Neither of them did. I think they wanted to do this for a while. I know Billy, I think, was the one who initiated the call, but the timing had to work out just well to where none of them were touring in support of their own record or in the studio doing their own record.
And in both cases, both artists squeezed these dates in between other tours.
Yeah, Billy was coming off of his River of Dreams tour, and I saw a handful of the dates just earlier this year in 94, and Elton was coming off of his tour for the album The One, I believe. And obviously The Lion King was out that year, so that was a big deal.
But we'll get into that in a moment. We have some fan mail, and I also have a funny, sort of tangentially related Billy Joel story to tell. And if it's no good, we'll just cut it. But so the first email comes from Robbie Casenza.
And the subject was, a capital story for you. This is a good one. He says, Jack and Michael, greetings from Lexington, Kentucky. Man, I've been meaning to write you forever. Love your work. It's truly gotten me through the past year. The Doug episode alone, I mean, fuck. I'm a Long Island born, Huntington, then East Northport, and been a Billy fan ever since I could talk. His ride has been, he's ridden his bike past our house all the time. I'll try to keep this brief, and I know everyone has a Phil Ramone story, though mine comes from the legendary Al Schmidt, who just recently passed away. It's not even a Phil story, really. Okay, anyway. So I got invited to play at Ringo's birthday in 2016 at Capitol Records. It was overwhelming to say the least. So as the after party is underway, I just couldn't handle the star power in the room, and there was no booze at all, which did not help. So I was wandering around Capitol and heard isolated Sinatra vocals coming from Control Room B. The door was open, so I popped my head in, and Al Schmidt is mixing and comping Sinatra vocals. He's got the suit on, a clipboard, just classic. He said hello, and I asked if I could sit quietly in the back. No, he said, but you can stand in the doorway and listen. He's all Brooklyn. I did, and a few minutes later, he asked if I'm with Ringo's crew. I said yeah, and we chatted a bit about New York. Then he says, do you know Phil Ramone? I said I love his work with Billy Joel. And he nods and goes, you can come in and sit down. So I sat in for an hour, and it was just incredible. Totally mind-blowing. Thanks, Billy. All right. Thank you both so much for your time and your work, and gusto for the good things. You guys rule. Robbie Casenza.
All right. Thanks a lot, Robbie. I feel like there's so much more to that story that we didn't get. I want to know more about the Ringo party.
Oh, totally.
I mean, it's funny. I just assume he's a drummer because we're drummers and we're all talking. And I'm like, God, could you imagine being a drummer and you have to play Ringo's party?
I couldn't even imagine it. What I love is that Al asks him about Phil Ramone, and as soon as he figures out that Robbie is hip to Phil Ramone, he's like, all right, this guy's cool. He can come in.
Yeah, that's a great story. I like it a lot. Next, we have some messages from Anthony Varden. Anthony's been popping up a lot on the Billy Joel Retold page lately. He hit us up on Facebook, and he and I have been chatting back and forth for a little while here. So I'm going to grab a few of the things we talked about. So it's not just one message per se, just a couple things back and forth that we were chatting about. Had some interesting perspectives and stories. So he started off sending me a picture of Billy Joel and Frank Zappa. He said since we mentioned the Billy James Hetfield photo, he wanted to send me this one because I think I've mentioned Zappa a few times. And it is a great picture. Real classy looking black and white one. Anthony mentions looks to be 86, 87. Billy's face is like a calendar to his fans, which is true. You can usually tell what year it is by his haircut and whether or not he's got a beard. So we chatted a bit about sort of, crossover fandoms, that sort of thing, how I'm into Zappa and Billy and Michael's into Metallica and Billy, things like that. And so he said, I'm fascinated by these crossovers. My grandmother was born in the USSR in the 1920s. She came here in 1978 not knowing any American pop music at all. Even she liked a handful of Billy Joel songs, Honesty, etc. She insisted the synth line from Pressure was taken from a Russian children's song she knew as a kid.
That's interesting because Billy is so well versed in so many different types of music. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if that slipped into his subconscious.
Or if it was even just in that style, perhaps something like that. I've heard somebody say before, and I don't know how true it is, that if you transpose it to the major key, it would sound like a polka.
It does. I've heard it.
You got to send that to me.
I'll see if I can dig it up. It's pretty funny. It's kind of frightening.
And everybody missed Michael's little polka dance just to accentuate the point. Anthony also says about his grandmother, she was a classically trained pianist. One of her comments was, what sort of idiot plays the piano standing up? We chatted a little bit also about some of the critics that didn't like Billy at all back in the day. And so he reached out to one critic that had seemed to warm up to Billy over the years. And he shared with us a message from that critic. And I guess I'm just not going to say who it was because I don't think they're still writing and I haven't been able to reach out to them. But I did think this was an interesting perspective. This critic writes, I tended to like more offbeat artists and didn't find Joel's music particularly interesting, but there's no doubt he and his music have endured, and I enjoyed doing a couple interviews with him later in the 1980s. We had a friendly discussion about how a lot of rock critics weren't crazy about his music for one reason or another. Actually, I liked him more than a lot of reviewers did. Remember how he attacked one reviewer, Ken Tucker, by shouting, "Fuck you, Ken Tucker," during a concert? I still remember Billy telling me how disappointed he was when his marriage to his first wife, Elizabeth, broke up. He told me he thought when you got married, it should be forever like swans. So I thought that was pretty cool, that the critic had a change of heart, and, just the fact that Billy being Billy seemed to change their mind a little. That's our fan mail. I have two sort of interesting Billy-related stories. Now that we're all able to get out a little more again, and I got vaccinated and have been able to play some gigs again, which has been just fantastic. I've also somehow managed to play, I think in my first couple of weeks of being back at gigs, I played probably like 5 shows with 4 different people, which meant, 4 completely different set lists to learn. And one of them was the shortest list. It was only about an hour, but this was a pretty interesting show. It was from a guy I know, Ty Kingsley, who plays in Philly, and he's been putting out a single a month, and they're all very, very contemporary pop songs. And he made this really nice transition from, he was doing a lot of guitar-based rock, and he kind of saw the writing on the wall. So all his new stuff, great melodies, great harmonies, great, hooks and stuff like that, but it's all, it's all loops and stuff like that. For this show, it was just he and he made an hour-long MP3 with his songs on it, and then some contemporary pop songs. So it was like Peaches in Georgia by Justin Bieber, Levitating by Dua Lipa, stuff like that. And I then had to play along with the MP3. So the MP3 actually played with the drums on the tracks, and I was playing over it while he was playing guitar and singing. And it worked pretty well. But, I kind of had like an existential crisis going into it. I'm like, well, what am I bringing to the table here? There's already drums on the tracks. I understand he just wants some oomph. And I'm practicing. He and I had spoken for a minute. I had mentioned something about the podcast, and I had mentioned, oh yeah, Billy's drummer. And he goes, really? You had Liberty DeVito on? And it kind of stuck out to my head that he knew the drummer by name. So I'm practicing, and it just comes to me. I'm like, what would Lib do in this situation? So I moved my hands about a ½ inch down on the sticks and just went to town. Not being overbearing, but like, I'm going to add as much of a human element, as much of a groove to this as humanly possible. And we're doing another gig, so I guess it worked. He didn't fire me. To me, it was that thinking like, I'm going to be Liberty about it. I'm going to be just trying to kick these songs in the ass from the back.
Yeah, lean
from the back
into
of the
it.
stage,
Yeah.
and see what happened. I thought that worked out well. And then I did have a Billy-related gig with Billy Handy, whom you all may remember from our Superfan Roundtables. So Billy's part of the Orpheus Singing Club here in Philadelphia. It's like a multi-generational, society kind of singing club. So they did a rock and roll themed show. They do a lot of standards and stuff like that. So he had me on. So Billy got to play a grand piano and had me on to play drums with a couple other backing musicians. We played Prelude without Angry Young Man. We did Prelude right into My Life, right into Uptown Girl. And then somebody else came on and did Piano Man. So how interesting was it to play Uptown Girl? And instead of like maybe 4 or 5 guys on the backing vocals, there was about 100 singers behind us. So that was a lot of fun. It was a nice opportunity. And Billy got to play a grand piano, which was fun too. Oh
yeah, whenever you get to actually play an acoustic piano like that live, that's so fun.
It's fun to get back to playing, and it's fun to have at least one directly related Billy story to go with that and one tangentially related Billy story.
Before we go into the tour here, I want to give a couple of folks a shout out if you don't mind.
Sure.
So first I want to say hi to Steve Mendel, who is a great music producer out of New York. He's worked with some incredible acts who shall remain nameless at the moment. Steve's a great friend of the show, and he sent me a little care package the other day of a really cool vinyl promo copy of Street Life Serenade, accompanying a 1974 press kit complete with the 8x10 newspaper clippings and everything. This thing is so cool.
Oh, wow.
So thank you, Steve. That was so awesome of you, man.
Do you have the press kit with you?
It's in the other room. I'll just show you later.
No show and tell?
Yeah. Yeah, no show and tell. Remind me next time, I'll grab it. We kind of inspired Steve to do this series on Instagram Live recently where he's calling it Late Night BJ, where he's playing a Billy Joel album a night and having different people on talking about Billy and talking about whatever. So I kind of caught wind of this, and I happened to be watching one night when he was going through one of the discs of My Lives. He prompted me to join his Instagram, and he and I just had a little impromptu conversation all about the podcast and, you know, what he does and what we've been doing and everything. And it was a lot of fun. He's a really cool guy, and yeah, he's a big supporter of the show, which is amazing. And two more folks real quick to shout out as well. One is actually a family member of mine, Nick Grosvenor. He's got an amazing podcast. He's a podcaster as well. It's called The Nick Grosvenor Show, and it's spelled just like my last name, Grosvenor. Each episode, he has on a guest, a creator of some sort, an artist, whether it be a musician, a dancer, an actor, someone who's into film production, an artist, so many different creative people from all walks of life. So each episode is a different guest, and he really picks their brain about the creative process and everything they do. So if you have a moment to check him out, I really recommend the Nick Grosvenor Show. Really good stuff. And I also want to say hi to a new podcast that I recently stumbled upon. It's Stephanie and Stephanie Talk Tunes. These two friends, ironically both named Stephanie, have been friends for years. Each episode is focused on one specific song that is connected to their friendship. And so it's kind of like the playlist of their friendship. They dive deep into the song and, you know, what it means to the two of them and experiences surrounding the song and the music. It's just really cool to hear two people have a connection to all this different music, who have known each other for so long, and, you know, the banters of two friends who have known each other forever. So it's such a treat to listen to, and what a fun concept.
Yeah, you're giving me some cool stuff to listen to now in all that spare time I have.
Yeah, come on, don't you have all this time in the world?
Oh yeah.
There's so many great podcasters out there that, you know, we love meeting new creators, meeting new podcasters, and it's fun to discover something new like that. So I'm happily sharing my new favorites with you guys in hopes that you give them a shot too.
So now that we've brought everyone up to date on the latest in terms of music and podcast listening in 2021, let's go all the way back to 1994.
It's a little bit funny, this feeling inside. I'm not one of those who can easily hide. I don't have much money, boy, if I did, I'd buy a big house where we both could live.
If I was a skeleton, but then again, no, or a man who makes potions in a traveling show. Does not much, but it's the best I can do. I gifted my song, yeah, this one's for you.
You can tell everybody this is your song. It may be quite simple, but now that it's done, I hope you don't mind, I hope you don't mind that I put down in the words how wonderful life is while you're in the world.
Bill Clinton was president. I was in my freshman year of high school.
God, I was going into 8th grade, I think.
And once again, begging my mom to take me to a Billy Joel concert.
This is the first year I saw Billy. I saw him on the River of Dreams tour at Nassau Coliseum with my cousins in January. And then it just so happened that he was coming to Philly with Elton John. My father and my uncle got tickets, and so we went to see him again. And then I didn't see him for, I think, 15 years. Something crazy like that.
Oh, wow. That's quite a gap.
Yeah, I didn't see him again until Face to Face in 2009 in Philly. So this was my second introduction to seeing Billy. Probably my first. I would say, this is my first concert in a ballpark. I mean, the first one was an arena, and this one was Veterans Stadium, and that place is huge, or was huge anyway. It's not there anymore.
Oh yeah, I mean it's what, a good 50,000 capacity.
Yeah, something crazy like that. It looks like they sold 150,000 tickets. So
Over 3 nights. Yeah.
right.
When I was thinking about this tour, I realized that to me this felt like such a separate entity to the River of Dreams tour to me. I mean, it was only like 4 months apart from when I saw him last, when this tour started, but it really felt like its own animal and really did not feel like it was at all connected to the world tour he was wrapping up.
I have a question for you, because it occurs to me now. I've seen Billy 3 times, which is, I mean, just a few less than you, not by much, I mean, who's counting?
Who's counting?
I've seen him twice with Elton John, and the only time I've seen him on his own was what's essentially a hometown show in Nassau Coliseum. And so going into this, what I'm curious about is, when you saw him solo, did he speak a lot more to the audience? Did he do a lot more riffing than he did with Elton?
It's hard to say. I wish I remembered more of the banter back then. He hadn't quite graduated into like dad joke territory. I do, that he's in now. I feel like it was a little bit looser on the banter front when he was touring by himself, because the Billy Elton thing was more of a production. And I think Billy and Elton had kind of picked the moments where they were going to riff off of each other. But I think that was a little more, not staged, but a little more planned out than his normal tour.
And I mean, that speaks to really what a challenge logistically a tour like this is. I mean, as fans, it was amazing. But I think he mentioned on a later tour that, what makes it difficult is, he goes, it's twice the nut. You have to pay for Billy Joel's band and you have to pay for Elton John's band. So the ticket prices are going to be high because you have twice the amount of people. Now you got this really expensive ticket. And of course, there's plenty of crossover between people who love Billy Joel and people who love Elton John. But everybody wants to hear their songs. Everybody wants to hear their favorite Elton songs and their favorite Billy songs. As great as it was, there was a feeling that they were just blasting through them, in a sense.
If I remember correctly, it was about a 3.5-hour show. Each of their sets were a little shorter. They were like an hour and change, like on their own. But then they had the big ending set where it was everybody together. But they packed a lot into that. It did feel like they were just kind of plowing through the set because there was so much to get in that amount of time.
And, I don't say that disparagingly. You didn't feel rushed when you saw it.
No.
It's a good show. Just in retrospect, when you think about it and when you know how much Billy does like to talk and joke around, there was not much of that at all. Although what I do remember very, very specifically is that Elton went first, and then Billy played his set, and then Elton came back out, and Elton came out wearing like this just spangled, glittery outfit, and Billy gets on the mic and goes, "Elton, what the hell are you wearing?"
Always making fun of his wardrobe, because Billy wore the same thing the whole show.
Yeah.
He would maybe take off the jacket if he's warm, but like what he stepped on stage with at 6:30 when the show started is what he walked off stage in when Piano Man finished at the end of the night.
Yeah.
Elton, he's got the wardrobe changes.
I believe I saw the first show, which would have been July 8th. I remember it was in the paper. We had like the Enjoy the Weekend guide in the Courier Times there in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and it would come with the insert on I guess Friday. And it was there, it was there that day. They had the picture that's on the front of the program, which Michael has. And when you picked it up, I remember I was like, oh, wow, yeah, that photo was burned into my memory because I was so excited. Because the show was that night, So I was like, look at that. So it's right there, and we got the tickets and all. Yeah, so they came out, and it was an interesting atmosphere. Whenever you go to a show at a ballpark, it always starts when the sun is still up. So everybody's like still a little restless. And there was just a very low-level hum, like an electric sort of excitement out of the crowd when they both came out. Because, we didn't know what it was going to look like. So I remember they both came out. They both sat at the pianos, traded the verses, things like that. Billy walked off, and Elton did his set. At the time, it's such a damn shame because I was looking back over these set lists, and I think I know every single Elton John song on there now, certainly. But I didn't know a lot of them at the time, which was a little bit of a bummer. But I will never forget at all Funeral for a Friend. I think I mentioned this on an earlier episode when they started Funeral for a Friend. It was so hot at that show, at that first show. and just a gust of wind came through the stadium right at the beginning of that song, and it could not have been more perfect.
That's a memory, yeah, for sure.
I remember I didn't know that one because my dad had to lean for okay, this also may not make it in, but we'll see what happens. For any Catholics in the audience, you might remember this sort of instance where at church, my father used to have to lean and like get right in my ear and be like, knock it off, you're at church, and really just get up and like make your freaking ear hairs tickle, and you're like, oh, all right,
Yeah.
So it was so loud there. I'm like, Dad, what's this song? And I'll never forget. He's like, it's Funeral for a Friend, because he was really into it. But he just did it the same way, where like he got right up in my ear. I was like, oh, all right, duly noted, sir.
Oh, that's funny. What I remember about that song too is that organ in the beginning, when it gets low to those low bass notes. Like I remember you could just like feel it in your gut.
Yeah.
It was just like it rattled you.
Yeah, not until I think I saw Springsteen do Jungle Land did I ever feel that low vibration again. Ray Cooper stuck out to me because he's such an interesting looking fellow, and he had this huge gargantuan gong on stage, and I think that was one of 2 times that he actually played it, and it always stuck out to me that he brought that huge thing just for like 2 moments. Somebody else is gonna have to corroborate this, because perhaps my mind has filled in some gaps. But to my recollection, he just sort of picked up the mallet and held it up and like smiled at everyone, and then turned around and gave it a big crack. Like it was like, here comes the gong, and I was like, yeah,
that sounds right. Speaking of personnel, why don't we run down real quick the band members on both bands? So for the Elton John band.
Okay, I'm gonna introduce the band now. First of all, we have on the bass guitar from Detroit, Michigan, Mr. Bob Birch. On the drums from England, Mr. Charlie Morgan. On the keyboards from Baltimore, Maryland, Mr. Guy Babylon. From Edinburgh in Scotland, Old Haggis features himself, Mr. Davy Johnston. And on percussion from England, Mr. Ray Cooper.
The smaller band than I remember.
Pretty lean, I would say, which helped, for that second ending set when everybody was on stage.
Yeah.
And then for Billy's band.
Let me introduce the people up here playing on the stage. On the keyboards and the synthesizers. From Edison, New Jersey, that's Dave Rosenthal. On the saxophone and guitar, percussion and vocals. From Brooklyn, New York, that's Mark Rivera. On the bass guitar, up the river from Yonkers, that's T-Bone Woke. On the guitar, from the South Shore of Long Island, the pride of Oceanside, Tommy Burns. Another gentleman from the South Shore of Long Island, from Seaford on the drums, that's Liberty DeVito. On percussion and harmonica and guitar and saxophone and vocals, from Melville, that's Crystal Taliaferro.
And so this was the lineup for Billy from the River of Dreams tour. So it was the same band that carried over from the tour that had just wrapped earlier in the year.
And so let's talk set lists, since we also touched on that a little. There was not a lot of movement in these set lists, even though he did multiple dates at a couple venues. Elton and Billy kick off with 3 dates at Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia. They do 2 at Foxborough Stadium in Massachusetts. And then the big run is 5 nights at Giants Stadium in New Jersey.
And for those not aware of the proximity, East Rutherford, that's essentially the New York area shows.
You know, even doing 3 to 5 nights in a row, the set lists stay pretty much the same. So I'll read off the first one, which is indicative of at least the Veterans Stadium run. So it's Elton and Billy. Together they do Your Song, Honesty, and Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me. Billy leaves the stage. Elton plays Philadelphia Freedom, Take Me to the Pilot, Leave On, Rocket Man, Simple Life, and The One. Both of those songs are from the One album that had just come out a little while before, and Elton just had gotten off his tour for that one. I guess he does New York State of Mind.
Some folks like to get away, take a holiday from the neighborhood. Hop a flight to Miami Beach, out of Hollywood. But I'm taking a Greyhound on the Hudson River line. I'm in the New York State of Mind.
Yeah, so what would happen on this tour is they would each take one of each other's songs
Right.
and play it in their solo set. Elton, for this show, brought out New York State of Mind.
Okay, that makes more sense. It was a while ago. I couldn't quite remember, Funeral for a Friend, Love Lies Bleeding. I guess that's why they call it the blues. Can You Feel the Love Tonight from The Lion King. Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting, and Pinball Wizard. So Billy sort of matches that energy at the beginning of his set, because Elton kind of ramps it up there at the end. He comes out and opens with I Go to Extremes, goes into Pressure, then plays the Ballad of Billy the Kid. His entry from Elton's catalog then is Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and then it's Scenes from an Italian Restaurant, My Life, Allentown, Lullaby into River of Dreams. So that would be his pair of singles from his most recent album. And then We Didn't Start the Fire, and Still Rock and Roll to Me, and Big Shot. Then Elton comes back out, The Bitch Is Back, You May Be Right, Benny and the Jets. The encore is A Hard Day's Night, Candle in the Wind, and they close with Piano Man.
Yeah, and that's actually pretty close to the show I saw. A couple different ones here and there, but by and large, pretty similar.
And it's just about the same going forward. I mean, when you look at, let's say, July 24th, which is at one of the Giant Stadium shows, it's almost exactly the same, but that Elton John and Billy Joel together, when they come out, instead of kicking off with The Bitch Is Back, they do You May Be Right and Benny and the Jets. And then the encore is the same. Billy also puts Goodnight Saigon into that one, and My Life. Elton's is the same. Still kicking off with Philadelphia Freedom, even though he's in Jersey now. A little while later, we get Honesty in the opening set with both Elton and Billy. And in this one then, Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me gets done at the beginning, not Billy on his own. We get Allentown. We get Lucille and Great Balls of Fire, along with A Hard Day's Night. And the encore is just Candle in the Wind and Piano Man. And so at that point, it looks like Billy's not doing one of Elton's songs. Oh, I'm sorry. Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, I guess.
I think that might be what he mostly stuck with for the tour.
As we see through this, run of shows, not a lot of variation. And then just as a side note, after this tour, Billy goes off to Australia for a string of dates to close out the year. Elton and Ray Cooper then go on a theater tour, rounding out the year after that.
My show actually ended up being near the end of the tour, though originally my show was at the Pontiac Silverdome in Pontiac, Michigan, which was the Detroit area show. Now, this show was originally scheduled for August 4th. Day of the show, Billy was having some throat problems, and it got postponed. This was way before the internet where you would find things out immediately. I think we found out on the radio or on the news prior to driving out to the show, but I believe there were a lot of people who drove in who didn't find out till they got to the venue that the show was postponed. Keep in mind too, because there was only 21 dates in all of the US and 5 of them were at one venue. A lot of people were traveling for these shows. I tell you what, this was the first time I've ever run into the situation of a show being postponed. I mean, I was 14 at the time, but I remember I was so bummed out. I was so excited, and then just, all day so excited, and then to find out no concert tonight, it sucked so bad, I remember. Yeah, but fortunately, it wasn't outright canceled. That show was originally supposed to be in between Pittsburgh on August 2nd and Columbus, Ohio, August 6th. Well, as a result, they ended up moving the show to August 18th, which was in between San Antonio, Texas, and Atlanta, Georgia on the 19th. So my date ended up being August 18th after all. You know, my memories were fairly similar too. I remember the whole vibe of, one, the show started earlier than a typical concert because it was such a long show. And, you know, you still have the end of the night curfew. You have to be done by a certain time. It was probably 6:30 or 7 when it all started. It was light for several hours.
Yeah.
I remember we were sitting lower level, about halfway back, kind of side stage. My cousin, myself, my mom, and my mom's friend, who was her high school principal. My mom was an art teacher. So it was the four of us who went to the show, and I just remember it was just like hit after hit after hit. It was just a greatest hits kind of show. Yeah, it was so fun. I'm looking at my set list. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but we got Honesty at our show. Let's see, Leave On, Simple Life. Those are a couple Elton tunes that he did. Elton did New York State of Mind. And Billy came up for a song he did. I guess that's why they call it the blues with Elton. Billy and the band opened their set with I Go to Extremes. Yeah, we got Pressure, Billy the Kid. We got Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. We did get Only the Good Die Young, which I don't think was played every night. And then we got the typical encore with Bitches Back, You May Be Right, Benny and the Jets. And then the last two, you know, Candle in the Wind and Piano Man. One thing I noticed too, you know, for the River of Dreams cycle, Billy had the beard going on and his hair was visibly getting grayer. Well, for this summer tour, he decided to go back to clean shaven and darker hair. He was looking a little closer to Stormfront than he was River of Dreams on this summer tour. But this would be the last tour that we've ever seen a clean shaven Billy Joel. So one interesting thing that happened on this tour that's worth noting is that on the second night of the tour, Liberty came down with some food poisoning. I think it was some oysters or some sort of seafood, something like that. He had some really bad reaction, and at the very last minute had to bow out of the show, and Elton's drummer Charlie Morgan was the last minute replacement. So Charlie ended up playing with no rehearsal on the Billy songs, mind you.
And this one's for our drummer, Liberty DeVito. He had a little problem the other night. He had to leave the stage in the middle of the show. And I thought it was because he ate one of those cheesesteaks. Now, he had a bad allergic reaction to, what was it? Shrimp. Shrimp. So go out and eat a lot of shrimp. But he had to leave, and fortunately, Elton's drummer, Charlie Morgan, stepped in and helped us get through the rest of the show. So MVP is Charlie Morgan. But anyway, we're glad to have Liv back. And we say after the show tonight, hey, take you out for some shrimp, Liv? What do you say? Okay.
Could you imagine having to, you know, you're sitting in with Billy for the first time, no rehearsal, 50,000 people?
Yeah, and you have to do something like Billy the Kid with all those stops.
So I found an interesting article that talks about the show. I'll read real quick. It's from the Morning Call, and this is by Jeffrey Gaiman.
Is that Allentown, the Morning Call? Bet you it is.
Yeah, it's got to be,
Lehigh
right?
Valley
Yeah.
and Allentown News, mcall.com.
The headline is Billy Joel, Elton John pump each other up face to face. And this is dated July 15th, 1994. These keyboard chameleons, Elton John and Billy Joel, put on a curious show Saturday night at Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia. Together, they were very impressive. They seemed well suited to each other's songs. As solo acts, they rose and fell according to the material and musicians. And a once-in-a-lifetime event lived up to its billing largely because of an emergency drummer. The 24-date tour is called Face to Face, and sure enough, the 3-hour concert began with the headliners on facing pianos. A set somehow crossed a Revolutionary War diorama with a compact stereo system. They opened with fresh versions of two stale numbers, Your Song and Honesty. They seemed to pump each other up, especially as singers. Joel left the stage after a decent Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me, leaving John and band on stage for a restless hour. The group seemed hell-bent on exploding already expansive numbers. John prefaced Take Me to the Pilot with a growling blues. Rocket Man lasted 7 minutes longer, climaxing with a run of sudden, spiky changes. Funeral for a Friend, Love Lies Bleeding, blistered in spite of wimpy harmonies and tame solos from guitarist Davy Johnstone, a formidable presence during John's glory days. The crowd pleasers did just that. Can You Feel the Love Tonight, John's radio-friendly tune from The Lion King promoted hand-holding, while Pinball Wizard provoked a jerky sing-along. More stimulating was the finale, a hopping Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting. After an intermission swatch of Rhapsody in Blue, George Gershwin, wasn't he the Elton Joel of his age? Joel and band started with a slightly underdone version of the splashy rocker I Go to Extremes. It was bassist T-Bone Walk who anchored a bland band in a rushed Billy the Kid and a rather by-the-book Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. Joel certainly didn't. Like John, he often bullied his way through phrasing. They should have known you don't have to push to fill up a stadium. Shortly after Scenes from an Italian Restaurant closed, Joel made a surprise announcement. Drummer Liberty DeVito has been ambushed by a Philadelphia cheesesteak. The pianist bought time with the tender Lullaby Goodnight My Angel, written for his daughter by soon-to-be ex-wife Christy Brinkley. The humid air buzzed with pain and with Joel's first consistently expressive vocal. The mood changed when DeVito was replaced by Charlie Morgan, John's drummer. The new lineup vamped on Jesu Joy of Man's Desiring, which fed perfectly into My Life. When John joined in, it wasn't hard to think Morgan was a ringer and that DeVito would return. He didn't, and he really wasn't missed. The River of Dreams, a burst of doo-wop gospel, unfurled gloriously. We Didn't Start the Fire, smoked like before, and It's Still Rock and Roll to Me, proved that Joel is too old for musical cliches and Elvis the pelvis moves. Face to Face confirmed a few things. John excels at pop gospel, Joel at soulful pop. They're perceptive performers of one another's signature tunes, although New York State of Mind had a rigid beat and Joel strained at times on Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. When they encored together on The Bitch Is Back and You May Be Right, they had the damn the torpedoes attitude that made them exciting as well as popular.
I guess they were divorced by then. I feel like that's almost like a glitch in the Matrix. It seems like he's writing from just a little into the future.
I knew it happened in 94, but it must have been early in the year, I guess, because in 93 they were still married.
It's funny, no fault of the writer. They didn't have the internet back then and all the set lists, but it's just funny that he says he bought time with Lullaby when, that was clearly in this, cemented into the set. But it's a good guess, Yeah,
it just happily worked out that way. Yeah.
It's an interesting take because, Allentown, the Lehigh Valley has been very friendly to Billy since Cold Spring Harbor. I guess you and I probably have more romanticized memories because they were like our first batch of concerts. That was the third time you've seen him, right?
This would have been number 4.
It was only the second time for me, but, even still, we were both pretty young, so I'm sure they could have done no wrong by us. Yeah. But it's interesting to hear somebody really take a critical ear to the whole affair.
I tend to look on those days with rose-colored glasses, obviously, but I find it interesting that he said it wasn't missed that DeVito didn't come back, and I think that's just a testament to how much Charlie Morgan stepped up.
Well, I guess he didn't have to play Billy the Kid, as we were saying.
Based on the article, it makes me wonder, Liberty started the show, but started rapidly feeling sick as the show went on.
Yeah, because if he came in on Lullaby, they were already like 7 songs in.
That can explain the first couple songs not having the pep that they usually have from DeVito on the drums. If he's struggling just to get through the songs and ultimately has to leave, that just doesn't happen for him.
Isn't it crazy that at least it happened on a face-to-face set where there was another drummer in the house that could have done it?
Really, how fortunate was that? Because Billy hasn't toured with an opener for however long. It would either been Billy finishing the show on his own or the show canceled. Knowing how Billy tends to prefer to play with the band, I wouldn't be surprised if that would have been the end of the night.
And it's interesting to think about how this reviewer felt it was stiff until The Bitch Is Back. You wonder if, especially on these first couple of shows, they were a little nervous about the time. Maybe they were just barreling through things. And once they got to the encore, they were like, well, we're good. We made it. We're on schedule. Now we can loosen up a little because we made it through the 2 sets.
I love Elton, but I always felt his approach and his shows were more stiff and the band was more stiff. Billy and the band, especially back in the day, were often super loose. Like they were the bar band, they were the party band, when Elton was like a little more clinical, a little more rigid. Billy had the second set every night. They structured it that way for a reason.
Yeah, it was always like that. Even when I saw him in 2009, and I just figured it was because Billy was bigger in Philly.
I just thought of a co-headlining tour that happened. Metallica, Guns N' Roses.
Was that on the Black Album or was that Justice for All?
It was 1992. So it was the Use Your Illusion albums for Guns N' Roses, and it was the Black Album for Metallica. They were the two biggest rock bands in the world at the time. And it was the same kind of deal. It was like a couple dozen shows, summer of 92, 2 years prior. That was the one where James Hetfield got lit on fire.
I mean, I'm going to be slightly nitpicky and say that while they were definitely the biggest bands, rock bands in the world then, they didn't have like the decades of stature. But you're right, that is a huge co-headline.
The two of them were selling out arenas on their own, and their tour, they were playing these same venues. Except it didn't go as smoothly as this one did overall.
No, not with Axl.
Montreal, James was in the wrong spot when the pyro went off. He got badly burned, rushed to the hospital. So Metallica had to cut their set super short, and their whole thing was like, Guns N' Roses could have came along, saved the day, played a nice long show. Axl's monitors or something weren't to his liking. So like 4 songs in to their set, he storms off stage and the crowd literally rioted.
Things started going wrong about halfway through Metallica's set when a stage prop exploded, inflicting second-degree burns on James Hetfield's arms and legs. The band was forced to terminate its set, promising the crowd it would return to play a makeup show, and Hetfield was taken to a nearby hospital for treatment. When Guns N' Roses took the stage about 2 hours and 15 minutes later, according to Montreal Gazette rock critic Mark Lepage, who was in the audience, the band played about 6 songs before Axl Rose told the audience, quote, "We got it together in Europe only to have it come apart here. In case anyone is interested, this is going to be our last show for a long time." Rose then sang Double Talk and Jive, and then Civil War, and then walked off.
The thing about Guns N' Roses, they had in all 2 important discs worth of music. Appetite for Destruction was a juggernaut. And then Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 could have been one CD. So it's like, it's so funny. They're like legends to this day, but like, you're really only hanging on technically one album. It was really Appetite more than anything.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was it. Because by this point, Metallica Black Album, that was album number 5 for them. All the albums prior were big, and they're still putting out records. But yeah, Guns really, the songs were great, but like people like loved that they were unpredictable or something. I don't know.
Yeah, well, there was that whole like, they were like not hair metal. They were like dirtier.
They were like sleazy, like a less cheesy version of Motley Crue. Well, Motley Crue was, again, did a lot of the makeup and all that stuff too. They were like 2 sides of the LA coin of the Sunset Strip. I remember seeing interviews like Metallica guys like, well, we learned a lot what not to do. They were a good case study on how not to do things.
Who said that? Metallica about Guns N' Roses?
Yeah.
When Aerosmith took Guns N' Roses out, they were sober at that point. They were trying to like tell them like, you guys got to straighten up. So Aerosmith made Guns N' Roses tour shirts. But the tour dates were all the rehab facilities that Aerosmith had been to.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. No way. I didn't know that. The tour book has a couple pages worth of background information about Billy and Elton, but also has a few interesting tidbits about the tour. So I'm going to read just a little bit of the beginning here, and then the tail end of this write-up that's inside the Summer 1994 tour book. It starts, "Is it possible to hear too many classic songs in a single evening? There's only one way to find out. The John Joel double act was originally Joel's idea. Even though he once complained to Rolling Stone that people compared me to Elton John when I was copying McCartney. Visitors to the Informal, a conversation with Billy Joel sessions he has hosted in England and the USA, will have been treated to his cheekily accurate impersonation of Elton. In fact, it's only remarkable that neither of them had thought of teaming up before. Their backgrounds don't sound too similar. Joel speaks in the pugnacious tones of his native Hicksville, Long Island, where he broke his nose learning to box, while John came from a sleepy little town near London and was almost lured into a career in classical music. But they have always had much in common. Elton says, Billy and I go a long way back. We're both big fans of each other's music. He's such a great piano player. You don't turn down the opportunity to play with another great piano player." And then it goes on to a bunch of biography information that most of us know by now. And the last couple paragraphs are kind of interesting here too. I'll go through these. And this is talking about Billy. He's found himself embroiled in not just one, but 2 massive lawsuits. Suddenly, it seemed as if everything he'd accomplished was hanging precariously in the balance. Joel responded to the challenge with characteristic bluntness and honesty. "I've made a lot of mistakes," he admitted. "I've made some amazing major screw-ups, but here I am, alive to tell the tale, so I must have done something right." Actually, the music biz mega lawsuit has become a kind of rite of passage for some of the biggest artists of all time. So at least Joel is in distinguished company. It happened to Bruce Springsteen, David Bowie, the Beatles, and the Stones, and to Elton John too. George Michael is still working his way through the endless labyrinths of the law. The experience has left Joel bruised and battered, but able to dispense hard-won wisdom. That would be my advice, he said. Get an attorney, but as soon as you can, get another one to watch over him. As if all this wasn't difficult enough, Billy has also had to endure the breakup of his marriage to Christy Brinkley, whom he first wooed by singing to her from the piano in a hotel lounge on the exquisite Caribbean island of St. Bart. As usual, Joel has taken it on the chin and has made a point of reassuring his concert audience that he's coping okay. Like he sings in My Life, I don't need you to worry for me because I'm all right. He just doesn't feel too inclined to play Uptown Girl anymore. That's all.
That's a lot of dirty laundry for a tour program. And let's compare that to the one from The Bridge where they get all technical about the monitor systems and the stage design, things like that.
Yeah, that tour book was Billy the Artist. This tour book is Billy the Celebrity. This is something you didn't see back in the 80s. Billy Joel's wardrobe by Giorgio Armani.
Wow.
And Elton's was Gianni Versace.
Giorgio Armani makes custom black t-shirts.
Well, actually, this tour, he switched it up. He was wearing a light colored blazer, like a tan color almost, with the black everything else, I think.
What was Elton John's bio info like? Was it as salacious or was it a little more milquetoast?
No, it's like they really did get into Elton stuff like that. It was basically a lot of his background and growing up, and they talk about their differences in musical influence, where Billy was Broadway and Tin Pan Alley, and Elton was coming from the glam rock of the late 60s, early 70s. And while they're similar, their backgrounds are certainly very different. But they work so well together, which is why this tour has happened several times since then.
Not anymore. I mean, they've certainly had their ups and downs since this first one. And I guess they're sticking to, or at least Billy's sticking to, he doesn't want to do it anymore because it restricts his set lists. But certainly Elton John had plenty to say when, Billy was drinking too much or wasn't taking care of himself. Elton had no problem airing those grievances publicly, which also, in later years resulted in Billy airing his grievances publicly or his rebuttals publicly. But back here, they were all good,
Well, I remember too, what was the famous thing, Elton's always telling me, why don't you put out more albums? And I tell him, why don't you put out less albums?
Yeah, and Elton was like, Billy went to celebrity rehab. When I went to rehab, they had me scrubbing the floors and this and that. I guess you could say that Elton sort of went through his drama earlier, whereas Billy kind of went through it here. In the 80s, Elton was, I guess, clean by then.
Yeah, Elton was sober a couple of years, I think, by this point. So he was feeling pretty good, and he it seemed like he was at a good place in life at this point.
But yeah, for whatever happened later, I mean, they seemed to be in good spirits on the dates that we saw them. It was certainly challenging from a logistical standpoint. Yeah. Like we said, a very challenging tour to undertake with 2 full crews, 2 full sets of expenses, a very long show to make sure that every audience member gets their money's worth. And, a really big stage. There's a lot of stuff on that stage. 2 grand pianos. I mean, yeah, they have plenty of room, but still, it's a lot of wires.
Right. And, that's another reason why a lot of these venues were the big football stadiums. They were much wider than arenas. So you had a lot more real estate. You could build a much bigger stage for these big football stadiums than you could if you were playing a hockey arena.
I suddenly wonder what their sound checks were like. They had to do 2 separate sound checks. Do you think they had 2 boards?
And then a third, it's like Elton and his band and his gear, 1 shot. Billy, his band, his gear, 1 shot. But then you had the last 40 minutes where everyone's playing together. So everything is live. And kudos to whoever mixed these sets when they were playing together. It did not sound like a sloppy mess. It was a nice mix. It didn't feel too over the top or too overcrowded with musicians, even with 2 drummers going.
I feel like you could almost do 2 drummers a little easier just because you're not dealing with notes, As long as they're cracking the 2 and 4 at the same time, you're kind of halfway there.
What I almost kind of wonder too is I wonder if during the end set, if like the Billy Joel songs, if Liberty's drums were the prominent one in the mix, And the Elton John songs, Charlie maybe was the more prominent one in the mix. Maybe it kind of went that way a little bit, so whoever was the drummer on those songs originally, I could be totally wrong, but I wonder if that's maybe a way they did it.
What were they flipping a coin on who was doing the sound at that point? Like, I hope Brian Ruggles and whoever Elton had got along,
In looking at the tour program again, it's got all the production credits and the personnel. It's got Brian Ruggles as Billy's live sound producer, and then you have Clive Franks as the sound engineer for Elton. So you have their separate crew, and then there's also a spot where it says joint personnel. So this is like the crew that they shared. And it has Steve Cohen listed as production, lighting designer, and director. Monitor engineer, same guy. So they had a couple similar sound people. It's quite a crew. I'm looking at this. Yeah, the crew is pretty impressive. The fact that you have essentially 2 full touring units, Billy's band and crew, Elton, his band and his crew, and then you have a whole set of personnel that kind of bridges the gap between the two of them. It's no wonder that these were one of the early, more expensive concerts, because, the production is just incredible. The audience member doesn't see the nuts and bolts of this. It just seems like a great show, but it takes all of these guys behind the scenes, all these men and women doing very specific jobs and running these shows to make it seamless out front.
And for all that running around backstage, occasionally having to replace a drummer Spinal Tap style, it was great memories for us out there in the audience. And of course, we want to know who else was in the audience. Let us know if you were at this first round of face-to-face shows with Elton and Billy back in 1994. Was anybody at that second show in Philadelphia where Lib had to bail out? Did anybody see them later in the tour? What were your recollections of this? Were you excited to see these two guys finally play together? Were you wondering what the mechanics of it was going to look like? And what were your thoughts leaving the stadium almost 30 years ago?
Yeah, and were you more familiar with one over the other? I know a lot of you certainly are Billy fans. Did you come into the show only being familiar with some of the just biggest hits of Elton and come away with a deeper appreciation for the music and what his band brings to the table? I'd love to see what your impressions were.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm very curious about that.
So reach out to us, please. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're all over the socials. If you look up Glass Houses, a Billy Joel podcast, or Glass Houses Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And you can also email us, glasshousespodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like, we'd be happy to read your email on the show, but we'll always ask your permission first. So feel free to, if you just want to send us a private note, feel free to do that as well. And we'll just keep it between us. But we would love to hear from all of you.
And if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, please take a moment and give us a favorable review and a 5-star rating if you're so inclined. It's a fast, easy, and free way to show us some support. The more 5-star ratings and favorable reviews we get, the more people Apple Podcasts will promote us to. So we greatly appreciate that. And if you'll excuse me, I think a Philly cheesesteak has gotten the better of me, so I think it's time to wrap this one up.
Thanks, guys.
Sing us a song, you're the piano man. Sing us a song tonight. We're all in the mood for a melody, and you got us feeling alright. God bless. Thank you, Giant Stadium. Good night. Drive safe.